All right, good morning.
Good morning.
Hey, how's everybody doing?
Good.
Good, awesome. Welcome to supporting LGBTQ plus students in your classroom here at the Center for Teaching Excellence. My name is Casey Carroll. My pronouns are he, him, his. I am an instructional designer here at the Center for Teaching Excellence. So before we go ahead and do our quick little bios, we'll give a couple of kind of housekeeping things, and then we'll get started. As you can see, all of you are here in person, which is great. We also have, we're mic'd. These mics are not for your benefit whatsoever, but we are streaming this online. And so we will occasionally be pointing at and talking to Gloria, who is monitoring the online stream through Adobe Connect. So hello, magical online people. So we've got a bunch of people online too. So we will be talking to y'all, but we will occasionally also be talking to the internet people, kind of giving them separate instructions, kind of trying to do the whole blended thing and kind of make sure that they have an active experience as well as y'all do. That said, because we are recording, we just wanted to make you aware that we are recording the session. Audio, there will be a little bit of video, so about, I think like, Katie, can you raise your hand? About Katie forward is going to be on camera. The back isn't. So just since this can be a sensitive topic for some people, just so you know, you are going to be recorded. We will eventually post it on the CTE video archive. So if you have a question or something that you want to ask and you would prefer it to be a little more anonymous, feel free to write it on a piece of paper and kind of pass it towards the sign and have somebody signal us and we'll come and get it and we'll take care of it that way. Otherwise, I think we should be good to go. Any other housekeeping stuff before we get going?
I think we're good.
All right. So I will kind of finish my little mini bio. So my primary role here at CTE is as an instructional designer. I work with faculty to help them with their teaching. So it seems like a pretty big role, a pretty kind of broad thing, because it is. So we help a lot of instructors with their online courses, but we also help with face-to-face courses. We help with course design. We help with anything from, hey, I want to try something out, to I need to design a whole program's worth of courses. And we say, yay, but that's going to take a little while. So we want to, so not just with course design, but we also try to do inclusive things. We try to do accessibility. So this is one of our things, this workshop, if you don't know already, is part of our Teaching Towards Inclusive Excellence Certificate of Completion. So if you haven't registered for that, you can do that kind of through the same thing that you registered for the workshop. So I'm very excited to be here with you talking about this topic and very excited to be partnering with my friend and colleague, Caroline Wallace.
Hi, I'm Caroline Wallace. Is my facilitator voice reaching the back? Can y'all hear? Okay, great. So my pronouns are she, her, hers. I am the Assistant Director for LGBT Education in the Office of Multicultural Student Affairs. So I work with everything from our Queer Talks program, Dinner Dialogue series, our Queer Connections First Year Experience, our LGBT Grad Social series, and also I manage the entire Safe Zone program. And so I do things like this as well, faculty and staff development, to try to bring some inclusion and awareness about LGBT populations on our campus.
I'm clicking.
So by the end of the day,
sure.
was this?
I think it says together, which is really, in hindsight, not a great way to do a presentation.
Sorry, I panicked.
So the goal of the workshop today is we're going to kind of give you the ability to kind of explain some practical approaches for creating and maintaining an inclusive environment in your classroom. And we'll be primarily doing that through looking at some scenarios. So this is not going to be kind of a basics of the LGBTQ community. We're kind of assuming a little bit of knowledge on your part, but mostly the scenarios that we talk about and the kinds of strategies that we're going to be talking about really are just going to be good teaching and good humaning in a lot of ways. And so if you are not necessarily familiar with all the intricacies of the LGBTQ experience, that's okay. I still think you'll get something out of this, and we will have some resources to educate you. So we'll have a little bit more in the end. Does anybody, I'm going to go with participated in a safe zone training on campus in the past? Okay, good handful of people. That is going to be probably our primary way on campus to help you kind of more fully understand the LGBTQ experience on college campuses and in general. And towards the end, we'll have some more information that if you want some more specific information about this community, that will give you some references for where to find that on campus. Want to add anything else?
That's pretty good. Yeah, just to say, like, the Safe Zone workshop gives the real groundwork and baseline. This is more about on-the-ground tools that you can use, even if you haven't been Safe Zone trained, just ways that you can start to make your class more inclusive, and then hopefully you can join us for a 3-hour workshop sometime, maybe next semester.
Yes. Yeah. This is not a 3-hour workshop, so don't panic.
Okay, so we have a pretty good-sized group here, but we do want to start doing some introductions to each other. So maybe at your tables or in groups of 3, you could turn to your neighbor and introduce yourself, what your name is, your department, one thing you're hoping to learn today, and then your pronouns if you're comfortable. I would really like those of us who don't think about our pronouns very often to share in this space and start thinking about our pronouns, but I never would want somebody to share if they're not comfortable. So if we can take 2 minutes to just kind of turn to your neighbor, say hello, maybe we can cultivate an environment. All right, awesome. That sounded like y'all were really sharing, and I really appreciate that. Am I just like in the way? I really appreciate that. Can someone very quickly tell me why pronouns are important? Yeah.
It affirms and centers gender identities.
Yeah, it affirms and centers gender identities. Pronouns, when we're thinking about creating an inclusive campus, are one of the smallest ways that we can affirm the identities of our students and make sure that we're, one, showing them that we have knowledge of pronouns and how and their identities and the different identities in our classroom, and 2, are not accidentally misgendering somebody or calling them by the wrong gender by accident. Sometimes we just don't know, right? And so this helps us get that information up front, and we'll talk about tools and ways we can get that information before the student even gets into the classroom a little bit later.
And I always like to point, so my master's is in linguistics, and so like I always like to come back to the language of it all, is when we talk about pronouns, especially now most of the time, it's in reference to gender identity, but we all have and use pronouns all the time for everything. And so it's just such an ingrained part for so many of us that we don't consciously think about them, because pronouns are what we use to refer to ourselves and others constantly all the time. It's one of the most basic building blocks of language. And so especially what Caroline was saying, for if we aren't using the correct pronouns for individuals, it's really just not referring to them correctly in a very basic kind of way. So I think for those of us that never always use the correct pronouns or are always used at us, it seems pretty basic. But if for someone else, it might be very important as well. Awesome. Okay. So just a little bit to touch on is some of the things that we're talking about today really kind of come from the idea of inclusive teaching. There's a whole kind of inclusive teaching, inclusive pedagogy school of thought, which we're not going to go fully into today, but the idea of inclusive teaching is not thinking in terms of necessarily of accommodating differences, but rather starting from the beginning and really making sure that all students are included in the curriculum, in the classroom, and not that we're seeing those differences as a problem that we need to overcome, but rather as an asset that we can use in class to further the learning of all of our students. So we'll be talking about that a little bit today. And there's if you want to know more about it, I'd be happy to talk to you about it, but there's just a lot that we can go into on inclusive teaching. But that's kind of one of the frameworks for us for today.
So a couple of things also, when we're talking about inclusive teaching and not like adapting, but instead coming with an inclusive framework, I think it's really important that we always assume or think that there's probably a transgender, gender nonconforming person in your classroom, so TGNC, and there's probably an LGBTQ person in your classroom. And that if we come from that framework, that state of mind, that can help us immediately start to work our lesson plans, our curriculums, and our mannerisms in the class around that inclusive teaching model. The other thing I want to say is when we talk about safe spaces, I want us to think about that as emotional safety, right? So physical safety is kind of bare minimum what we can offer our students. They're probably not, or we have ways that we can keep them from physical harm in our classrooms, right? But emotional harm, there are ways that we can do that too, right? And so emotional safety doesn't mean not having challenging conversations. In fact, challenging conversations are obviously incredibly beneficial to the learning experience. But emotional safety is allowing students to come into a space where they can say, I can have these challenging conversations without being attacked. Knowing that my professor, knowing that my classmates all are there to have, civil conversation or safe conversation so that we can have these challenging conversations. Because I really like this visualization. We want students to get out of their comfort zone, but we don't want them to go to the panic zone. And this goes for any student, not just our LGBTQ students. Any student can hit that panic zone moment immediately. So we want them to not only stay more in the learning zone when they're having that challenging conversation and challenging their ideas and thinking forward without getting out of that emotional safety, right? And so when I think of safe spaces, I like to think of this model more than just everyone's fine and we're never gonna challenge or we're never gonna, but we don't want them to have fear of being hurt or attacked or triggered. So that's what we're thinking. Yes.
Yes, hi.
Hi, my name is Asiye. What is TGNC there?
TGNC stands for transgender/gender nonconforming.
What does it stand for? I don't understand.
So the T is transgender,
Okay.
and then gender non-conforming.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Gender nonconforming is another term for non-binary students. If you're familiar with that term, they're kind of interchangeable. Any other questions? Sorry, I know we're going fast.
Any questions or anything online, Gloria, before we move?
No, not yet.
Great, thanks.
Are we going to further explain these two differences or
The differences between gender identity and sexual orientation?
no, between TGNC and LGBT? Why you have to yes.
So TGNC denotes gender identity, so a person's thoughts about their gender and who they are and their gender. LGBTQ denotes their sexual orientation, so who they like, who they love. And so the differences are, one is about who you are and the other is about who you love. And so a transgender person may be straight, an LGBTQ person may not be transgender.
This is just kind of a different way of kind of splitting it out. If you see the title of today is LGBTQ, so that's including the T and GC as part of the LGBTQ. So it's not that there's a big difference in those things, it's just kind of a different way to write it, necessarily.
And we're writing it split out this way because we want you to understand that there will be people who have different genders in your classroom and people who have different sexual orientations. So instead of just saying there probably is one person from the community in my classroom, there are people with all different identities in my classroom. So that's why we split it out like that.
But LGBTQ is umbrella word that also cover TGNC, right?
LGBTQ would, but otherwise the LGBTQ doesn't necessarily include transgender persons, but it could. It sounds kind of complicated and nuanced because it's complicated and nuanced.
So another way to write this, so if you were to write it down another way, always assume there is a person of a different gender or a transgender person, and always assume that there are people of multiple sexual orientations in your classroom. Does that make a little more sense language-wise?
Anything else? All right, so to continue, we have a little bit of, so we said that we weren't going to do kind of the introductory kind of things, but we are a little bit. So Surprise. So if you have a internet-enabled device of any kind, go ahead and pull it up. We're going to do a little bit of a kind of warm-up vocabulary review kind of thing to kind of give us in a little bit more into the mindset for what we're going to do today. So Gloria, if you could push out the Kahoot website, and then also just to make sure they see it, can you put the game pin in the chat box too?
And if you don't want to put your name, you can put your initials, you can put somebody else's initials, you can put an emoji, whatever you want.
Most emojis don't work. I tried to use a I tried to use a unicorn one time, and it just had that stupid box that comes up on Android phones. I was like, that is homophobic. That is not okay. That is totally not all right. Yeah, so I think everybody, we're going to do just a little bit of a quiz. We got about 34, 35. Is anybody trying to get in, but they're waiting? All right, what about online? What, Gloria, does it look like?
Somebody had asked for the pin.
It's 499506.
Okay.
Okay, so we're doing an intro, a warm-up. If you don't know the answer, don't panic. It's fine.
And it's all made up and the points don't matter, so just hit a random button.
Right. So has anybody not done Kahoot before? Okay, the point of Kahoot is to get the right answer the fastest. Now, I don't want you to panic, it's okay, but to win, you have to get the most right answers with the fastest time, okay? So if you're like, wait a minute, why am I number 37? I got the right answer. It's because you were a little slow on the draw, but that's okay.
All right. In the effort of time, we're gonna go ahead and keep getting like one new person every like 15 seconds. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and start it. All right.
Ready?
Are you ready? Are you gonna read them?
Yeah, I'll read them.
Okay.
Okay, this is a medical term designating a certain combination of gonads, chromosomes, etc. Now you select the shape that corresponds to your thoughts and your answer.
Okay.
All right, the answer was sex. Yay. Medical term, sex. All right, so Colt is in the lead. Oh my gosh. All right, this is a socially constructed system that describes qualities of masculinity and femininity to people. Woman, gender, sex, man. All right, the answer is gender, 56. All right, Colt, still in the lead. This is the percentage of students on USC's campus that identify as LGBTQ+. 3.6%, 6.72%, 13.78%, or 20.12%.
All
right, the answer is 13.78%. That data comes from SAPU, which stands for Sexual Assault Prevention for Undergraduates. That is the module that all incoming first years take. It talks about risky behavior on college campuses, and the data from that shows that about 13.78% of our students identify as LGBTQ. All right, Meg, jumping up. All right, this is the term for someone whose gender identity and sex assigned at birth align. Gender, intersex, cisgender, transgender. All right, the answer is cisgender. We got 44 people. This is sex assigned at birth aligns with your gender identity. All right, Meg, still in the lead. Pretty close. Okay, my friend Cece is a blank woman. How do you use this in a sentence? Is a trans woman, is a transgendered woman, is a trans asterisk woman, is a trans woman. It's trans, just with no asterisk. So trans is an adjective. It describes a noun. It is a separate word from the word woman. And using an asterisk is a little bit outdated of a way to describe people. Some people still use it, but essentially if you look at Trans Student Educational Resource, they have a whole explanation as why we don't use trans asterisk anymore. Essentially it's otherizing because it's already an adjective. To talk about cisgender people, you would say, my friend Cece is a cis woman or cisgender woman.
Since
How
we
was
have-
it used before in the past? What was the point of the designation? Like, sort of not really, or
So
like to
the
bring attention
asterisk
to,
was
or-
kind of used to denote the umbrella term with the trans umbrella.
I think it's more like if you use an asterisk on like a library search term.
Yeah. And so
Like if you're like looking for like trans man, trans woman, transgender, like yeah, it was more like a plus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and then we don't use the ed at the end because it's an adjective and you don't really, grammatically it doesn't work, but also it kind of implies that there's an end to your transition, and that's not really how it works for trans populations. So.
Anything else before we do the next one?
CJ, jumping up. All right.
But AJ has the highest answer streak.
Oh. Okay, the assignment usually by medical professional people as male, female, intersex, etc. So is that sex, sex assigned at birth, gender, or sexual orientation? All right, the term is sex assigned at birth. So when we are talking, especially about our trans populations, right? Let's say we're talking to our friend Cece, she's a trans woman. We would never want to say to Cece something like, oh, back when you were a boy. Cece's always been a woman or a girl, right? She was assigned male at birth. And so if we're talking about that, we would say sex assigned at birth. Does that make sense? Are there any questions about that? Okay.
There you go.
All right, CJ. It's close. The preferred umbrella term for all genders other than man or woman. Okay, it's a trick question. These are all correct. So not for the term non-binary, there are 4 ways to write non-binary that you will see written down, and they are all correct. So non-binary with a dash, non-binary with no dash, NB with a dash, also NB with no dash, and also ENBY, which is pronounced NB. Yeah, they're all correct. All right, next. Okay, Michael went to the store, pronoun, bought some milk, and paid for it with pronoun credit card. How would we write this out? Yes, it's they, there. Because Z here would also be correct, except that it's got an apostrophe. So it's also on the sheet, so if you looked at that before, you might know. Okay, Kat, up at the front. All right, the type of sexual, romantic, physical, and or emotional attraction one feels for others. Sex, gender, straight, sexual orientation. Wow, very nice. Sexual orientation, good job. An umbrella term for people of marginalized gender identities and or sexual orientations. Is it pansexual, queer, bisexual, or lesbian? All right, the term is queer. Yes, all of these are marginalized sexual orientations. But we're looking for an umbrella term that describes both a sexual orientation and or a gender identity. Queer does have a complicated history as a reclaimed slur. Do want to acknowledge that not every LGBT person wants to use the word queer, but it is something that we use in the office, and I think y'all probably do use it as well, potentially. And so it's something that we like to acknowledge because some people do use it to describe their sexual orientation or their gender identity or both. Are there any questions? Yeah.
There are some articles about like queer studies, kind of. So is this marginalizing or not? I don't understand that part.
So it's complicated,
Yeah.
essentially. So it is a slur, but it has been reclaimed by many people in the community to say, well, if you're going to call me queer, I am queer, and that's awesome, and here's why. So
I think she's asking about the definition of the word marginalized.
Yeah.
So the word marginalized means a group of people, possibly by an identity or otherwise, that is not part of the mainstream. So heterosexual people are generally the presumed sexual orientation in most societies in America, and any other sexual orientation is generally considered to be pushed to the side or onto the margins or marginalized. When you hear it queer used in an academic sense, that's usually where studies of sexual orientation and gender identity often will go under the umbrella term of queer studies. which probably started in the 60s. Most things did. And so when you are talking about that, so sometimes you'll actually see some academic programs that are queer studies, you see queer theory, that kind of stuff. So part of that was, I believe, someone correct me if they know better than I do, I believe the scholars that started doing that purposely named those studies queer studies as a reclamation, as a way to take the word back. And to, yeah, so. All right. Thanks.
Okay, we got one more question.
One more.
Cat's in the lead. It's close though. All right. This state has no prohibition for employment discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity.
Means you can get fired.
Is it
for
Maine, Georgia, Tennessee, or South Carolina? Yes, it is South Carolina. So when we're looking at protections, there aren't a lot. And so that means that we as a community need to be able to make a more inclusive community to help protect and create safety for our LGBTQ students and friends and colleagues.
And also, like when we're talking about, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in just a second, when we're talking about creating those safe spaces, the comfortable spaces, your students aren't coming to you as blank slates, right? They're coming to you with experiences. And so you don't know whether or not your marginalized students or your underrepresented students, the level of discrimination that they have felt prior to your class, they come with prior experiences. And so when we're talking about gay rights, when we're talking about the LGBTQ community, we're often, the narrative talks a lot about the positive things that have happened over the last 10, 20 years, and a lot of that is true. But it is still true in the state of South Carolina today that you can get married on Sunday, fired on Monday. So this is where our students are going to be going from into employment situations. They're going to, this is against the policy of the University of South Carolina, but it is not state law. So that is something to keep in mind, the whole context. So if students kind of sometimes still feel a little combative, it's because there are still a lot of things that are under attack. All right, who wins?
Kat wins, but it's very close.
Congratulations.
Well done.
Is Kat here or online?
Yay! Congrats.
I guess that goes against an anonymity thing, but whatever. So.
All right, are we thoroughly confused or are we doing okay? Do we have any questions? Okay, great. All right, so we have basically structured this as what to do prior to meeting your students, what you can do during your semester, and what you can do after, right? And how we can check ourselves afterwards and see how we did. So prior to meeting your students, it's very important to me, I think, to try to head off conversations as much as you can. So
my notes are here, yours are over there.
Yeah. So there are not a lot of ways for our students to change their name without getting a legal name change. And so because of that, really the only way they can change that is through Blackboard, unless they get a legal name change. And there are only 3 ways to get a legal name change in South Carolina. And to change your first name, you have to go to court. So it's a whole thing, it's a long process, and it may not be possible for our first year 18-year-old students, and it may not be possible for our students who are non-traditional age, etc. And so what we can do though is try to find out their names and their pronouns before they come to class. The best way to do this is an intake form. I don't think it's a good idea to go to class the first day and call roll and say, okay, what do you want me to call you? Because that can kind of create that anxiety, even though intentionally we're trying to make sure that we know what our students want to be called, what their names are, what their pronouns are. That kind of shouting out in class can create that anxiety, and even sending a roll around may not be the best idea. So what's better, I think, is to send out a form. You can make a Google form in 10 seconds, and this is the way to head off that conversation so that you don't accidentally misgender somebody, so that you don't accidentally use the wrong name. They don't necessarily have to come out in class. And also it shows your students that you know that they may not go by the name that's on their roster, right? And that helps them think, okay, this professor knows about me, and that's a person that I can probably share my experiences or at least feel better in class discussions with that professor behind my back, right? Like having my back, not behind my back. Yes.
And this is especially helpful for your students who may be transgender, may be in part of one of these identity groups that we're talking about today.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I've never taught a class where I've had like less than like 7 out of 20 students that had a different name
Mm-hmm.
that they went by than the one on their roll, and it had
Mm-hmm.
nothing to do with gender identity. It had to do with whatever their great grandpa was called.
Right.
And so like this can help with a lot of things. So instead of having to like take an extra amount of time, you can start learning the names that you want to be called from the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Is it okay to ask for their legal name as it appears on your roll so that you can match?
Yeah, I think that's fine, especially if maybe they don't go by the last name.
Right.
So you could probably say something like, well, so when I send professor notifications, so sometimes students will contact me and they'll say, my name is this, can you please send my professor a letter telling them that this is my name? I'll say they're going to appear on your roster as this, and then, but their name is actually this. And so I would say, like, if you're doing that on a form, because I understand if you have a class of 200 people, like there's 15 John Smiths in there, and it's going to be tough, right? But maybe, or you can take USC ID as well, and that way you can you don't have to ask for their legal name. I would never say legal name though. I would say name it as appears on your roster or something like that.
Or real name.
Yeah, don't say real name. Why?
Because it implies that the name that they want to choose to use is less real than the one that they were given when they were born.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Could you not just circumvent that entirely by sending out an email to all of your class on Blackboard and saying, hey, respond to this email?
Yes, definitely.
You have that information right there without even having to make it match it.
Absolutely. Or you could just take their email in the, like if you want a database that you can pull really quick, you can take their email in the form. If you have their USC email, you can't change that, unfortunately, so then you'll know exactly how it corresponds to Blackboard.
Also, the like, hey, respond to this email thing runs into a workload issue. If you have 3 classes that have 150 students each, you don't want to do that because it's going to be terrible.
And I'll be real, I love y'all asking these questions because like I don't teach like a class, and so this is a great way to brainstorm like, okay, what is the best way for me to get this information? Because so like I take these up for my peer educators and I just get their USC email and whatever because I've already met them because I've interviewed them. But yeah, like if you're in a large class, you're like, what's the best way that I can get this information and sort it? That's perfect.
But if you're teaching like one section of University 101, and you only have 19 students and you want them to practice emailing a professor, then that's going to be an appropriate activity, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, so I agree with everything. I love everything, but I'm just concerned. Can we legally ask students about the gender identity?
Oh, yeah. Okay, this is on here. Legally, yes, one. But this is on here because it's for the information that I need for my work. But interrogator forms, if you don't need their gender, like don't. Like you don't need to ask, you know? I would always suggest asking name and pronouns. But yeah, and actually when you're like, but that's a good point. So like when you're taking like research data, that kind of stuff, looking at the forms that are maybe already like made, like in your units or in your offices, do you need that question at all? And so I have it here as gender and align, but do you need it? You can take it off. So legally you can ask, but it's directory information, you already have it. But it's not accurate. it's whatever's in their well, it's not accurate, but it's whatever's in their banner. But yeah, yes.
Do you know if Blackboard, when people sign in, do they have the option to choose and type in the names they want? Okay. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm actually going to show you in a second. No, you're fine. You're fine. That's a perfect question. Yes, the only place you can change your name without getting legal name change on our campus is through Blackboard. So.
It's only first name.
Say again?
It's only the first name.
Okay. Yeah.
So if your legal name is Catherine and you go by Katie, then you can go into Blackboard and you can change your first name so that it shows up with what you want. But it won't change the email.
But when they sign, so when they sign on and then you have the squares of people, and then if you hover over their name, are they able to say you know, if I have 25 people in a class, am I able to see their preferred name when
Are
they
you
sign up
talking
to
about like
Collaborate Ultra?
Oh, in Collaborate? It should show up in Collaborate to whatever they've set it to in Blackboard.
Okay.
We can check.
Okay, thank you. Other questions about? So as an example, because this is probably a little hard to read, essentially what I usually take is first name and I say as you would like it to appear on a name tag. Because some people still like put their legal name in there. And we're trying to get their name, and so we want to make sure that they, like, whatever you put on a name tag, right? Then I also say the same thing with last name, because some people don't go by the last name that is on their birth certificate. And then pronouns, and I put as you would like them to appear in a name tag, and then I give an example, because some people don't really know what that means. And sometimes you'll get like honorifics, like some people put like Miss in there because it's never been asked of them before. So if that's the case, I would send an email, hey, just for clarification, you put this as your pronouns, is that what you would like to be called? Technically this is an honorific, they're not pronouns, so like maybe we could have that conversation. If you're not comfortable having that conversation, like I'm around. But when I've contacted students before and been like, hey, you put this honorific as your pronouns, like, is that what you want on your name tag? Because we do, for like our peer educators, we do name tags. They're like, oh, sorry, I didn't understand the question. And so if you can just clarify, usually they're like, oh, right, yeah, that's no problem. Another thing that I would say that's not on this form or not on this screenshot is ask when that can be used. So would you like me to use these pronouns in class? Would you like me to use them just between us? Would you like me to use them, what did Archie have? Like in like the outside of class? So when you're talking about a student outside of class, if you ever were, yes.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. See if you can get a kind of when or where they're comfortable with those pronouns being used. Because we don't want to accidentally out people either. Is there a question?
Sorry, is it an online question?
It's an online question. I'm trying to see if the mic is on.
You should be fine because they can hear you through the room speakers.
Okay. So the question online is, if a student specifies pronouns to you, but does not want the classmates to know about it, how could you address that person in the classroom?
I would ask them. So I would see if you can either talk to them in person after class or shoot them an email or something to see what would you like to be referred to in the classroom, or how would you like us to refer to you in the classroom. Because they have invited that conversation or you could even write it on the form. If you do not want me to use these pronouns in class, how would you like me to refer to you in class? Other questions about that? Yes.
Can you just ask, like, what name would you like me to call you in class? To the general
class, like if you were
instead of doing an intake form per se.
I would not recommend it.
Okay.
Because it could create stress on the person, because that person's going, okay, do I say it? Do I not say it? Okay. I would much more recommend a form of some sort or an email. Or even you can put in your syllabus that they can, like I said, I do professional notifications. You can put in your syllabus that if you have a different name, you can contact LGBT programs. We have a form online and then we send a letter. But pronoun go-arounds or like name go-arounds have pros and cons. Because like we did one, right? Because this is an educational space and we're trying to, if you don't think about our pronouns very often, trying to kind of think about that and like kind of work through how those conversations go, right? But in a general classroom, that may not be the best idea, right? Depending on the culture, depending on who's in the class. And it might start a conversation we don't want to start necessarily. So, but it also can create stress on our trans students if they're like, well, should I come out? Should I not? Like, that's a hard, so that's why I suggest an upfront intake form for large classes. But it depends on the culture and learning experience you're trying to teach as well. Other questions? Just a couple other ways that you can,
Very
oh, sorry.
Very
good. Yeah. Just a couple other ways that you can kind of have these conversations up front is you can put your pronouns on stuff. So here are examples. You can put it on your name tag. You can put it on your business cards. You can put it in your email signature. And if it's in your email signature or your business cards or your name tag, I'm gonna almost guarantee that 98% of the time, the students or the people who need to see that are gonna notice, and the people who don't aren't gonna notice. So this just signals to your students that you know what pronouns are. And I can't stress enough how much of a relief that is to students. Seriously, it's so small, but it really, really signals to them that this professor knows something about who I am. And the people who like don't know about that or might have something to say about it probably aren't even going to notice. So that's all. That's what I got.
Right.
So we have just a quick scenario on your own. You have a scenario sheet if this is hard to read, but just like internally take a moment. Let's say you receive a letter from me on very fancy business letterhead that says you have a student who goes by a different name and pronouns than what's listed on your roster. What do you do? Okay, would anybody like to share what they thought they would do? Sure.
I will send an email and ask them how they want me to call them.
Sure.
Yeah, personally.
Yeah, I got this email. I want to confirm. What would you like?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
I would update my personal roster.
Great.
I use, just so that way I don't have like a slip of the tongue and go to the wrong thing.
Great, thank you. Perfect. Yeah. Awesome. Thanks.
All right. So this is kind of moving towards you've met your students for the first day of class, kind of looking at during the semester as a whole. These are a couple, so also if you're online, with the handouts, there is the PowerPoint for you to download, and also we'll be emailing out the PowerPoint to everyone after this presentation, so you don't have to like take pictures of all of them if you don't want to. So these are a little bit of the instructions on Blackboard that we were referring to earlier. So during the semester, if you want to tell your students that they have the opportunity to change their first name, it will change the first name kind of pretty much everywhere in Blackboard. It just won't change it with their email. So you might still, so again, like if you want to have your own personal roster, which is a great idea, that you might have both of those things there for your reference, since you're going to have to use both names as you're going through the bureaucracy, that you might need to know that you might receive an email from a name that's different than the name that you interact with on Blackboard.
Just the first name.
Just the first name. The last name is really, really hard to change. And that goes for everyone, inclusivity, yay. So some of the things that you can do for your course is you can proactively supply some resources. So like Caroline mentioned in your syllabus, including a reference in the syllabus to ALMSA that says that if you need additional information, or if you want to give me some information formally about your name and pronouns, you can do that, including the information on how to change name in Blackboard. There are a lot of people that can benefit from that. As you are creating this class community, as you're creating, and this goes for both online settings and for face-to-face settings, the more that you can create a community kind of environment, the more that all of your students are going to feel like they can share and that they can be vulnerable and be comfortable. So some of the things you can do, make sure that you're setting expectations for your learning environment, setting expectations for not just how they will be expected to contribute in an academic sense, but expected to behave and expected to interact with others. So most of this class community setting is to help create that comfort level, but it's also to set expectations so that if down the road during the semester you need to have a tough conversation, if you need to protect a particularly vulnerable student, that you can have these things, these community expectations set up beforehand that you can refer back to and like, hey, we all, or you can even create those expectations together. Be like, this is something that we all created jointly. This is something that we agreed to as a group. And it turns out that what you have done, you may or may not realize is a violation of that. So let's revisit it. Right? Something else that you can do is you can look at your course design and your instructional materials, depending upon, and this goes for kind of representation in a lot of ways as well, is you can look at, most of my experience is through teaching first year English. So in English 101, English 102, looking at what are we doing like in an English literature course, depending upon the specific topic, are we only teaching dead white men? Like, or what is the variety here, right? What is, depending upon the topic, what voices are we bringing in? And even if you're teaching a subject matter or a discipline that you don't necessarily think aligns with diversity and inclusion initiatives, you can still think about representation. So you may not be bringing in diverse voices when it comes to specific subject matter, but are you bringing in diverse voices when it comes to the academics that you're choosing to cite and reference? Are you bringing in engineering, are you making sure that some of the articles that you're bringing in, if relevant to the subject matter, are written by women or written by people of color? Yes?
How do we find pieces written by people who identify as LGBTQIA+? I don't say that Maishi cis.
That's gonna vary by discipline.
Yeah.
So
will vary by,
yeah, so often either the author has written something specifically about that population, or in their author bio, they speak about being from that population, or their focus being about that population. But that's really going to vary by discipline. I would start with sometimes we have professional organizations, and we have those like cluster groups or Facebook groups. We can say like, hey, I'm looking for works by these populations to, you know, are there any suggestions? I mean, we can start there as a jumping off point, but yeah.
And honestly, my first instinct with a lot of that is like discipline queer, like discipline gay, like just start Googling and just kind of see what comes up. And so I think that there, some of it will be challenging and take some effort. And some of it might be a process too. So when we're talking about this kind of stuff, especially when you're wanting to incorporate some of these things into course design and instructional materials, maybe this semester it's one article, and then maybe next semester it's a couple more, right? So it's not necessarily going through, because we all know that if you go through and change all your instructional materials, you're also probably having to change all of your prep, and we don't want to do that all the time. So making sure that it's, and this can be said for a lot of things with innovative teaching, active learning and stuff like that. Just pick one thing this round and kind of bring something in. And that way too, like if you don't have a lot of time or resources right now, you might be able to just start with a little bit. And then a lot of those times when you find like one article, you can find who that person referenced and maybe contact that person and say, hey, I'm looking for more resources. Like it kind of, it can snowball sometimes. But I think that it's a really good question. And I think those kinds of resources in terms of course design, instructional design, and finding more kind of representative instructional materials, I think it's still a new thing that people are trying to do. But if you find any really good databases, let me know.
One more thought is, if you already have these populations represented, are they being highlighted, right? So when you give out a literature, or if you're working, I don't really know how engineering works, but if you're teaching engineering and you know, these are things that were discovered by people of color, by women, by LGBT people, give a bio, right? And I mean, do that for anybody, any of the people that you're studying, right? Or you're giving out, like, here's a really cool fact, like this person was from this university, you know, and give a bio and highlight those achievements for all of the people that you're teaching about, or all, you know, let the students like learn a little bit more about the history of such and such thing, you know, so that they can get a full picture of why we're studying it, right?
Contextualizes.
Yeah, that's the word.
Awesome. Okay, so one more thing that you can do. So if you get a little bit of information about your students at the beginning of the semester, something that you can do is throughout, make sure that you are eliciting feedback from your students as the semester goes. So one strategy that you can use for that is to get mid-semester feedback. We all get information with, which we'll talk more about here in a second, but we get the end of course evaluations. But once you get the end of course evaluations, the course has ended. So if your students are saying, I would really need this, this, or this, like if there are ways that my learning experience could be improved, it's too late. Those students have gone. So if you are able to get information 4 or 5 weeks into the class, partway through the semester, if you're teaching face-to-face, there are a lot of kind of techniques that you can use to kind of do kind of really quick kind of temperature check kind of things. If you're teaching online, you can kind of do short surveys and some of those kinds of things. Even like quizzing type tools like Kahoot or Poll Everywhere. So there are different ways that you can get just a little bit of feedback, like a little index card that maybe has 2 questions, things like that. So that if you're unsure about whether or not what you're doing is having a positive impact or whether or not there's more, you'd be surprised how often it's revolutionary to say to someone, maybe you should ask your students. Like, they probably have a pretty good idea, or like they might have some opinion about what's going on in class. So it's a really good place to start. So, any question, anything before we go?
So this is slightly off topic, but in the vein of during the semester,
sure.
When you're teaching in an environment, I just kind of want your opinions, is when it's often when I'm being taught, I'm learning about the instructor or the professor's personal experience, and sometimes through personal experience, you can learn through that story what potentially their sexual orientation or gender identity should be. Do you recommend doing that in an academic setting in the spirit of inclusiveness to reveal what you?
It's an interesting question. So
like, do you think it's a negative, or do you think it's not black and white?
So the question is basically about self-disclosure in the classroom about whether or not you are a member of a underrepresented group.
Inclusivity, or do you think it does the opposite?
I think that it is going to depend to a certain extent. So these are personal opinions at the moment. I think it's going to depend on your class. I think it's going to depend probably a little bit on your discipline. And it's going to depend, frankly, on your comfort level and the amount to which your employment is guaranteed. So like, to be totally honest, in higher education, if you are non-tenured, if you're a contingent faculty, if you're a grad student to a certain, you are a vulnerable population in terms of employment. And so there are risks involved with disclosing certain things about your identity. We just said South Carolina, you can be fired for being gay. Does the University of South Carolina protect from that in their policies? Sure, but the law doesn't. So I'm not saying that you're not protected here or anything like that, but I'm just saying that there's a certain level of risk involved. So I would say that in most of my classroom experiences, I have not, or with undergraduates, I have not self-disclosed. I self-disclose with faculty all the time because it's more of a peer-to-peer kind of thing. When the last fall, I taught University 101, and I consciously chose in that setting to talk about my husband and to self-disclose and to talk about my experiences as a gay person occasionally. Generally, when it came up, I mean, it's University 101, so it's more of a homey kind of feel. And they literally came over to my house, so I'm not gonna be like, this is my roommate, right? Like, I'm way past that. That's not gonna happen. Right. There's a certain level of understanding there that it was For that, it was that I'm being open and a little bit vulnerable for y'all, and so you can be a little bit open and vulnerable to me. But I think like that course in particular is a special kind of course for that. And I think that if I was to teach English again, there's a good chance that I would probably bring in some of those representative authors, and so I would probably self-disclose at that time. So I think it would kind of, it depends on a lot of things, and I think it's a very personal choice.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if the risk or if the benefit to the students and the people that we are looking to be addressing here today, the benefit outweighs the risk.
Students want role models,
yeah,
and to see somebody, so to see somebody who is achieving their career aspirations in a classroom, yes, could be hugely beneficial. But I'm never gonna tell some like protect yourself, first. And so like I absolutely would love, but so for example, if I go into a I don't teach U101. So if I go into a U101 classroom of students I've never met who like Casey has a relationship, right? And can feel comfortable disclosing things about himself. I don't know how these 18-year-old students are going to react to me talking to them about sexual orientation, gender identity. And so I usually don't disclose. Now, the thing is, I don't have to, because people assume that I'm not bisexual very often. But so I don't usually disclose in those situations because I'm thinking about my safety in that situation. So again, it just depends. And sometimes if I do get in that situation, people have a lot of questions, maybe I can relax a little bit and share. But yeah, it just, people want role models, and I think there's really great benefit to showing that you can succeed as an LGBTQ person in a workspace that you want to go into, but don't sacrifice your own comfortability or your own safety or your employment. Or do. Or do. It's up to you. I'm not gonna,
And this is, I think, also a little bit more like kind of something that's covered in safe zones. We'll probably wrap it up here just in a second. But the whole coming out thing, like a lot of people associate a certain level of shame with like, well, I didn't come out. Should I have come out? Should I disclose? Mm-hmm. And I really just want to emphasize that you have to do what's right for you, and there's no shame in that choice one way or the other. Gay teachers get fired all the time. Mm-hmm. And so like, there's just there's no protection. And so like being a representative and a role model is really good, but also like having money and is also good.
You can't do the work if you don't have a job, right?
There's a disproportionate amount of the homeless population is LGBTQ, right? Mm-hmm. So like there's risking employment can be a very huge thing. But I think that that's something that is good for the larger campus, because one of the reasons why we're doing this, right? So it's good for continuing to have these conversations in higher ed, continuing to have these conversations about your students, and referencing kind of earlier what we said was like being careful with like creating situations for self-disclosure for students with pronouns and stuff. Like Carolyn and I just chose to disclose to y'all, but honestly, given the topic that we were doing, I probably wasn't going to otherwise. You might have made assumptions, but I hadn't actually thought. I do it in Safe Zone all the time on purpose, but I hadn't actually planned to here because it's kind of irrelevant for what we're talking about for this, but it was made relevant with your question, which is not a bad thing, but just pointing out.
Yes.
But,
online question. I hope I can find it. So then should those of us without job security not use or post our pronouns on our email signatures, for example?
That's a personal choice.
Yeah, I think I would say, just referencing the earlier conversation, that if it's something that you are comfortable with or those that you work with, that I think I would just go with personal choice.
I would say talk to your supervisor if you're comfortable. Like if you think your supervisor would be behind you, like there's layers to that. But
if using your pronouns in an email signature is the equivalent of coming out, which it may be to you because it's not for me, because my pronouns in my email signature match my perceived gender identity. And so that's not a coming out situation. If it was like Casey Carroll, homosexual, like MA homosexual, right? And so then that would be me coming out to literally every person that I emailed, and that's a different situation. And so I would say for you, that would be a very personal choice. And I think that it is difficult. So honestly, I can't say yes or no to that. But it's a good something to consider.
Yes.
Can you also explain about that there and
so it's another possible pronoun.
usually what that imply?
Usually non-binary or gender non-conforming people that don't
Trans or
possibly that they essentially they don't want to use he and they don't want to use she, which implies that there are two options. So some people choose they, and some people choose option other. That they choose to kind of pick their own pronouns basically, and just tell people what they are. And so with the Z.
how you define it if it's not transgender? So what is the other word or what are other possibilities?
Possibly just gender non-conforming, or non-binary. Yeah, so I would say probably with gender expression. Because of the time, so I'd be happy to talk to you a little bit more about this afterwards. But since we're running out of time, I want to go ahead and make sure that we kind of finish up what we were talking about. But again, all of that is great stuff. Like if you come to Safe Zone training, we cover kind of all those nuances. It involves a unicorn. It's great. So yeah. So we're gonna go ahead and skip the active learning portions, which I know I probably told half you not to do, but whatever. So we have 2 additional scenarios on here that we'd be happy to chat with you afterwards. If we have a little bit of extra time, we will. But we'll do just a little bit more of this content so that we can then have some additional time for questions, which y'all have had lots of great questions, which is fabulous. So towards the end of the semester, basically again, we'll be sending these slides out. So the main takeaway here is that we really want you to, in general, but especially in terms of diversity and inclusivity, is to kind of critically reflect on your semester. Think about the things, again, kind of looking at your curriculum, kind of what we were referring to earlier, looking at kind of your classroom climate. Were there things that you were doing to using kind of maybe non-inclusive language? Some people refer to, if they refer to groups of people as you guys. Some people don't really like that. I'm from the West Coast, so I'm a native you guys speaker. Like that's just our default, you plural is you guys. It has nothing to do, grammatically it has nothing to do with gender, but it kind of does, right? So I have been in the South for 10 years and I married a Southerner, so I use y'all now, and it's kind of handy. And so like those kinds of inclusive language, if you're using y'all, things like that, how are you kind of conducting your class? And also taking the opportunity to evaluate your areas for growth. So we're not talking about mistakes. You may have made some mistakes, or there may have been some things that you want to improve on, but we want to focus on the fact that the best thing you can do is do better next time. So if there's some things that you're like, you know what, I don't really feel comfortable about how this went down in class, take the time to talk about it. Recognize that those are ways that you can improve for your future students. For most of us, you're going to have more future students than you have past students right now. And so also you can consider your resources on campus, which we will look at here in a second. But you can do a consultation with the Center for Teaching Excellence. We have 4 great instructional designers who will be able to talk to you about your course in general. If you specifically want to talk about these kinds of issues, I'd be happy to sit with you. OMSA is also available for consultation. You may have your own professional organization that may have resources for these kinds of affinity groups. And then, so some of our additional resources, we've got there's another Safe Zone workshop. There about once a month at HR.
Yeah, so we do. Do you want me to say?
Sure.
We do, so Safe Zone workshops for faculty and staff can be signed up through HR. And so we do, one faculty staff focused Safe Zone a month. Also, graduate students can take either the student Safe Zone or the faculty staff Safe Zone, depending on like what population you want to learn with, right? You're kind of in a special gray area. But you can sign up through the HR training portal. If you go on se.edu/multicultural and try to sign up for a Safe Zone and you said that you're faculty or staff, it's not going to let you. So I'm telling you, you sign up through HR. The next one is November 11th. But we also do specialized Safe Zones for groups. So if you say, my whole department would benefit from this type of training, we can do that. We schedule like 16 Safe Zones a semester, and the majority of them, or at least half of them, come from specialized groups. And so all we ask is that you give us a 3-hour time block. It is 3 hours. We will not split it up. It's 3 hours and a closed door and 10 people minimum. That's it, okay? So faculty, staff, and students, faculty and staff, just like whatever you want. 3 hours, 10 people minimum, closed door. Now, we also do, so the Safe Zone workshop is the baseline workshop. We also do a trans advocacy workshop, which focuses in on our transgender and non-binary populations, okay? But please, please take the Safe Zone before you take the trans advocacy workshop, because again, it's not gonna be, we're not doing a baseline review. We're focusing in, I wanna make sure everybody is able to participate fully in those, knowing kind of the general overview of the LGBT population, right? So, but you can sign up for those on our website. So if you put that your staff and you put that you want to go to a trans advocacy workshop, it'll let you do it, okay? So if you have been Safe Zone trained already and you have not been trans advocacy workshop trained, please join us on November 25th at noon. That's the only one we're having this semester. Hopefully we'll schedule more next semester. Any questions about that?
So this is our info. Basically, we'll go ahead and wrap up with some questions. We still have a couple of minutes as we're wrapping up. In front of you, you do have a workshop evaluation. You can fill that out for us so we can get some, we will get some information, but the CTE will also get some information about what we want to be doing. As we wrap, this is our contact information. Please don't hesitate to contact either one of us for anything. What questions do we have as we wrap up with our last couple minutes?
There was an online question somebody had asked about having different signatures in your email.
Okay.
So we can do that in Outlook easily. And Blackboard, remember, is not a full email system. So, but if you send emails through that, it goes only to your students,
right,
unless you have somebody else entered in your class. But then you can be maybe safer with your pronouns.
That's great. Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Did everybody hear that?
Okay. What else? Any questions?
I have a grammatical question.
Sure.
So we need to call use them or they. What about they are plural? I mean, you know, let's say I'm gonna mention to my friend about this workshop and I want to mention about you. So they is or they are. So what kind of usage?
It's my understanding at the moment that most people are using the plural verb to refer to a individual who uses they pronouns. So Caroline is over here, and they will be going to the store later. They are my friend.
They are.
So it should not go into it too much. Like if you got an email from me, Casey Carroll, you might not know immediately what my pronouns were. And so if you wanted to refer to me, it's a natural native English speaker thing to say, they emailed me earlier, they are with the Center for Teaching Excellence. So it's, when you like put it under a microscope, it seems a little funny, but it's really a natural thing that is used as a they singular fairly often. Also, there are some dialects of English where they is a correct grammatical structure, and so depending on who you're talking to, it's going to matter their own comfortable level. So you might, depending on who you're talking to, hear they is, but most of kind of mainstream standard English, I would use they are to refer to a singular person that uses they pronouns. Does it help? Thanks for asking. What else? All right, so we'll be around if you want to ask any other questions.
I have cards.
If you are, I've got some cards too. I think I have some cards in front. If you want to give your evaluations to Lori, and if you are working on the scenarios, if you want to talk to us, please do. So thank you all for being here so much. Thank you for being online, and hopefully we'll see y'all soon.